Hey guys, Warman here. Welcome to this month's recap of news regarding Medieval 3. To those that missed it, we decided that we were going to make videos talking about Medieval 3 once a month because we have a unique perspective that we can bring to this discussion, by virtue of us working on this mod. And well, we're at the end of January, so here we go. Apologies in advance for the heater. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that or not, but it is really cold out. You're just gonna have to put up with it. Another major reason why I feel like this series is necessary is because a lot of people are sleeping on some of these forum posts made by Leif. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, dude. I think people are being way too flippant and dismissive of the potential here because it's pre-production, and they're missing on some very important pieces of info. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to give my general thoughts and observations on how things are looking so far based on all the news that came out this month, and then we're going to be talking about the specific posts. We're mostly going to be talking about forum posts, whether we're talking about threads created by Leif or posts he's made in other threads. That's going to be the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today. So in general, I liked what I was hearing this month. Almost everything they said sounded good. Hearing a lot of the right things and a lot of what they were saying sounded promising, whether it's stuff that makes sense for the period or stuff that I didn't consider but I feel like could still work. Of course, like so many other things, we need to see if they can back that up. But again, I feel like they're on the right track, which is more than I can say for many of their other titles. I also need to talk about the nature of how they're giving updates, because there's some oddities here, and I feel like it's also just interesting how we're still collectively trying to figure out how often they're going to give us updates about certain things. For example, I was curious to see if we were going to get a live stream this month. I wasn't sure how often we would be getting these, but I guess we can say that they're not going to be monthly. And I'm sure some people might be thinking, well, Warman, it's in pre-production, what'd you expect? Well, considering how we had a live stream 2 weeks after the game was announced, I say anything is possible. I feel like everyone involved, whether we're talking about us or Creative Assembly, are still trying to get acclimated with what they want to do, because I know the live stream was very much a work in progress setup anyways. The blog post thing has me a little bit confused though, because what is the functional difference between a blog post and a new thread? Seriously, we're going to be talking about no less than 3 or 4 threads in this video, and I feel like all these could have been blog posts as well, so I don't know why that is. If I can give a suggestion, Creative Assembly, I feel like it might be a good idea to combine all the threads you guys made and release that as a blog. Anyways, let's get into some specifics. The way we're going to be talking about these forum posts and threads is I'm going to summarize what the thread was about, what the post was about. I don't plan on reading these posts verbatim because it's a lot to read otherwise. I will link each post and thread in the description. If a statement is short enough, I might read part of it, but otherwise I'm just going to have the posts available for you to read on your own. We will give our thoughts about it, impressions, suggestions. We'll talk about some of our own experience with some of these things, and then we're going to have some questions we're going to formally ask Creative Assembly about these topics at hand. So that's how this is going to be structured. Let's get to the first post. This first thread is from December. It's called Seasons, Turns, and Time, the Medieval 3 calendar. Basically, this is the thread that's talking about what the turns per year for the campaign is going to be. If you missed the first part, the game is going to be set over 300 years. They talk about how difficult it is to balance things out. To cut to the chase, the default setting is going to be 1 turn per year. Now, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of that. The reasons they give for this decision are based on things like how much time you spend per turn, as well as the fact that most people who play these games only play them for like 100 or 150 turns. And this also relates to an issue with the campaigns in these games. I know there's a growing wave of criticism towards Creative Assembly making these campaigns on the shorter side, and I understand that Creative Assembly has said that this is based off the data across all titles. I cannot but wonder though how much of this is the chicken or the egg situation. Are people doing shorter campaigns because that's how you design the game, or are you making the design based on what people want? I don't know if I fully believe the idea that it's the players that have set this pace, especially when there's more and more things being added to make it shorter. The point is 1 turn per year. I feel like 2 turns per year is a little bit better. Campaign length aside, I totally do understand the issue that Creative Assembly has here with this, because turns per year is one of the most subjective things ever when it comes to Total War campaigns. Seriously, there was a whole submod space of people making various turns per year submods for this mod because they disagree with what we've done. You get people that want to get to the later tier units sooner rather than later, and this relates to the time frame stuff that I mentioned in the last video, where people don't seem to understand that you can't have a campaign mode have 4 turns per year and starting in like 800 500 or 1,000 and expect to get to those delicious knights in plate armor anytime soon. I personally prefer 2 turns per year because I feel like that kind of hits that sweet spot where you have like a sense of different seasons and stuff. But again, a lot of people disagree with me, and I know a lot of people will also disagree with Creative Assembly. So Creative Assembly also says at the bottom here that they are looking to have campaign customization options so that you can basically increase the amount of turns per year. This is an excellent thing that I hope makes it through production. This is absolutely something that we need. More customization options in these games is great, so having something like this would be excellent. I don't see why you wouldn't want to do this, because that way everyone wins. People can play what they want. I also kind of find it funny how there's like 5 seasons, of one of them being Harvest, so it's like there's 2 summers. Again, I understand the reason why for that, but it's just kind of strange. Speaking of customization options, they're also talking about stuff regarding characters aging, because again, this also can tie into stuff like with the turns per year, but going for something that's more like a 1-to-1 or doing like the slow aging thing of Medieval 2, and God knows we've had a lot of aging problems ourselves with our mod. Related note to the time frame stuff and the turns per year, I want to talk about this post Leif made regarding technological progress. This was in response to someone else's thing, giving a glimpse of how technology is probably going to work in this game. One aspect that we are keen on introducing for technologies is also a sense of osmosis. Technologies travel between people, and especially the medieval world is very iconic for the importance of trade routes and how they transported ideas, techniques, methods, and technologies across the world. Being exposed to a certain technology typically meant you would start to adopt it. They also want key innovations to stand out, like spinning wheels and presumably stuff like gunpowder. A big point of inspiration for some of this is like the invention of gunpowder stuff in Medieval 2. I like the idea of this being like an osmosis thing. I just hope that it's not going to be too hard cut to a certain century. Slice Acura had an idea of basically nixing the concept of turns per year and time frames entirely, and basically adopted a system similar to Age of Empires thresholds, and using stuff like technologies and stuff to kind of like usher that in. And that might be a way to mitigate some of the issues that come from having a Total War game spanning over multiple centuries. Creative Assembly's probably not going to do anything like that, but something like this is pretty close. So here are my questions for both this and the turns per year post. Regarding the turns per year and the time frame, can people play the game past 1440? I'm not saying will there be any other kind of events or anything like that, but could people theoretically just keep playing and playing the game kind of like how Medieval 2 did it? So if I wanted to paint the entire map, even if it took like hundreds of turns longer than that, would I be able to do that? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but just kind of like a clarification would be nice. And regarding this whole thing with the technologies, how many innovations would fall under this? Because I presume stuff like gunpowder, and you also name drop stuff like spinning wheels. What about developments in armor? What about developments in just other kinds of technology in general? How in-depth is this going to be? And this is going to be a common question you're going to notice I'm going to be asking, because I'm just curious to know how detailed this is going to be, because I feel like that's very important. So next up, I want to talk about this post here that was in response to a person asking about the secondary sources Creative Assembly used to fuel ideas for this game. And Creative Assembly has basically told us their sources, and I'm going to put the post on screen. So I haven't read any of these books, but some of the other mod team members have, and yeah, they're okay. Now, unfortunately, the biggest issue we kind of have regarding the historical accuracy of the units in this game, this doesn't really address what we think is kind of the biggest issue regarding historical accuracy in this game, and that is Creative Assembly's understanding of the medieval material culture, because many of these sources, yeah, they're good and useful for certain things, but regarding the appearance of the units, many of these sources are not the ones you would use. Like, as I understand it, this book would be useful for portraying the Holy Roman Empire accurately, like on the campaign map side with some of its structure, but in terms of how the units look and making sure that's accurate, this is actually not going to be all that helpful or useful for that. So yeah, basically the only question that I'm going to ask about this side of it is, what sources do you have specifically for the medieval material culture of this game? What is your main source for that? We'll just have to see how this goes regarding how units look, because again, there hasn't really been any more material to talk about since the stuff when they announced the game. We just have to wait and see on that one. Leif also made this response regarding the nature of the economy and trade regions, and we get some very interesting stuff here. But I mean, besides the fact that they've said in several posts that people can hold on to wealth, whether we're talking about churches or monarchs and stuff like that, but the biggest takeaway for here is that you can not only trade between factions, you can trade between regions. And they even have a screenshot for this. and you could basically leverage the resources between regions to help each other out. Say Region A has timber, Region B wants the timber, they can trade it and be able to construct stuff faster. So yeah, that's really cool stuff, and I can also see how if like in times of war that could be devastating. Like imagine if like France conquers parts of Spain, that could cut off your trade route, that could lead to like a spiral if you're not careful. The fact that this also could lead even more importance to ports and maritime cities. And there's other interesting side effects of the way this trade system works, by the way, and we'll get back to that later. So these next forum posts are all going to be talking about stuff related to battles to various degrees. And when I say that people have been sleeping on what these forum posts are saying, this is what I'm talking about. Seriously, there's some big reveals here and no one's talking about it. So the first post I want to bring attention to is this one here regarding the nature of rock, paper, scissors and battle balancing. Leif rightfully points out the issues of rock, paper, scissors and what happens if it's too rigid. Regarding the balancing paradigm, they cite StarCraft 1, where basically you had counters for things, but there was also, as he puts it, contextuality and nuance. A good example would be Knights. There really shouldn't be a hard counter to Knights. They are the best equipped and best trained units on the field, but what if you use the terrain against them? What if they become exhausted and disorganized? What if they put themselves into an unwise position, like being crowded by a lot of other units? And then he goes on to say that they're going to be leaning into stuff like context and situational encounters. I love the idea of mentioning stuff with terrain being as a way to counter Knights, talking about like Knights being disorganized and exhausted, unwise positions. This is all good stuff to hear. This is how Knights were historically defeated quite a few times in battles. And it's an excellent thing to see. Because this is a game and not a mod, and it's on a new engine, this also could lead to some very interesting things I hope Creative Assembly takes advantage of. So yeah, this is all very promising. I hope stuff like deployable stakes makes a comeback. I hope that we can bring back dismounting for cavalry units and that the AI can actually use it. I would also love it that when Knights get unhorsed, there's a possibility they might survive and just continue the fight on foot. Having Knights being bogged down in mud and stuff, which theoretically could have already been done, but seeing that visually would be great. Again, using the terrain against the Knights. This is all stuff I hope we can see. Whether or not we're going to is a different question, but... So before we get to the next post, I want to talk about a video made by Invicta, trying to propose an idea regarding cohesion and how that can be introduced in battles and in juxtaposition with other things like officers and standard bearers and stuff. It's a very cool video with a very cool idea. I highly recommend you check it out. Really the only issue I have with Invicta's video specifically is the fact that he's calling these Knights of Jerusalem here Knights of Toulouse. Please Invicta, don't do this again. Seriously, if you need imagery for mockups, reach out to us. These are what the Knights of Toulouse would have actually looked like. I know it's beside the point of what the mockup is supposed to be, but come on, my dude. You're a history channel. I know you know better. This video rightfully made the rounds, but did you know that Creative Assembly responded to it? And they describe it as the psychology of warfare. The way Creative Assembly seems to be handling cohesion is a bit different from what Invicta said, because they don't want it to be a bunch of bars. They want cohesion to be related to a bunch of different things like discipline, fatigue, and morale. They talk about how a lack of morale can lead to problems as much as very high morale or overconfidence. They talk about how environments can lead to issues of cohesion. Cohesion is the degree of which entities can be visibly isolated from their unit. Some of this is pretty straightforward too, where it's like if individual entities in a unit can be isolated and ganged up on, that's a problem. I don't like saying this lightly, but some of this is giving me slight Rome 2 flashbacks because they said similar things there. Hopefully, because it's a new engine and because they're in a better headspace for this, hopefully it will be better, but we will see. They also talk about charges in this post as well. The idea if a unit has a lot of cohesion, they're going to be more tightly packed and harder to charge, versus a unit that's comparatively more loosely spaced. The cavalry unit could plow right through it. And this definitely has a basis in history, well, with the infantry revolution and the several high profile failures of knight recharges because of densely packed infantry. They also kind of mention some unexpected ways how they can use their psychology systems to really accentuate differences between units. You know, the idea that some soldiers can work better isolated than others. I don't know what units that could be referring to specifically, but I'm intrigued. So in essence, while they liked Invicta's proposal, and I do think there is certain aspects of it that are going to be in Creative Assembly's system, the essence of the difference they say is going to be that it's going to be a key element of the simulation and not a feature built on top of the unit. And basically it's going to be like a secondary layer that's going to relate to morale. So it's kind of hard to ask questions about this right now until we see some more of it in action, but we do have one. Can a cavalry unit refuse to charge or have the charge be stalled or stopped before it collides because they're dealing with a unit that's too dense, like pike units or something like that? Will they just either not charge properly, or will they like start the charge and like it stops? Will something like that be a thing with this system? Lastly, and this is the biggest one, and this is also hot off the presses, Creative Assembly has seen a lot of the discussion regarding modular units and retinues, and they've made a big forum post talking about this. And there is a lot to break down here with this, and you better believe I have a lot of questions. So to summarize some of the main points. First of all, it's basically going to be similar to Free Kingdoms. They name drop Free Kingdoms. It's a little bit different because it's not tied to a character, it's tied to a region. Now, of course, these regions will still have their lords, and it's these lords, these characters, that will take control of the retinue of the group. They also said that, at least in the early game, there's going to be no standing armies. Another interesting change is they're kind of bringing back generalist armies, but not entirely, because the way they word it, they make it sound like individual units can travel within their home region without a general. But again, that's a very specific way of wording it, so I wouldn't be surprised if they have to go beyond their home region, they need a general to do so. They also made it clear that there's going to be a progression from the early game to late game, with the early games being levies. So we're talking about stuff that's very feudal. It will disrupt the region's economy. If there is questions over the legitimacy of the crown, they say that it might be harder for you to muster levies. That makes sense. Contrast this with the late game, where you have professional soldiers and more standing armies, and these ones require a permanent upkeep, but they don't disrupt the economy during times of war. And they'll also free of some of the other feudal shackles like legitimacy. Now, they seem to imply that you can customize these retinues, these levies, a little bit. So basically, if you want your region to have really good knights, you have to upgrade the stables. Makes sense. And then also you have to import war horses in through trade. So that's what I was saying earlier regarding the interesting implications of how they're setting up trade to be more in-depth and region-specific this time. And I like that. It gives you a reason to care about inter-region trading. Sadly enough, once you recruit the unit, you can't customize it. They expressly said that's not how they're going to do it, although they might do something with bodyguard units later. Another big thing they mentioned, and this is where you guys gotta make your voice known. As part of this post, they address the idea of, are they going to have more than 20 units per army? Are they going to go with 40 or something bigger? But Creative Assembly doesn't feel confident with having anything more than 20 as a default. But they said that they might add more freedom for the player if they really want it. So please, let Creative Assembly know you want that flexibility. Another big reveal, and this has me very excited, is that the units in these regions will have the heraldry of their local region. Now, of course, there's still going to be the faction stuff with it, but they will have the local heraldry. And that is an awesome thing to see, and I can't wait to see how that actually manifests. And thankfully, I don't think it's gonna be just the banners. Like in the example they give, they describe a unit as having the colors of the city. So I presume it's gonna be more than just the banners. We'll have to see how that goes, especially if we're talking about Iberian examples. I'm curious to see how accurate Creative Assembly is gonna make this. Will they give them the colored helmets like the primary sources go, or are they just gonna keep it with like shields instead? Another reason why I'm really hyped for this part of it is this is the kind of stuff that we really couldn't do with the mod. Not for lack of trying. I'm sure if you've been around for a long time, you remember the English earldoms thing a while back, which was a thing where we had like sub-rosters for various factions, where we had like based on like notable earldoms and counties and duchies. This wasn't good for a lot of reasons, but what ultimately killed it was just the nature of how something like this is just not congruent with Attila's engine. Hopefully Medieval 3 can do a way better job than we ever could, and this is one of the reasons why I'm cautiously optimistic about the game, because for all the stuff that we've been able to do with this mod, all the hardcoder limits we've broken, all the things we've done, there are still certain things that we would love to do or would be great for a Medieval 3 experience that we could never do. Between stuff like this, some of the stuff I was talking about with knights earlier and having proper fleshing out for stuff like dismounting, these are all things that we could never do with this mod. And again, like I keep saying, we still need to see how this plays out, but this is all very promising and hopeful, and I'm eager to see where this goes. Also, just for the fun of it, I decided to go back to an older version of the mod, a version that still had the earldoms and duchies units, and basically use that to create a mock-up of what I think Creative Assembly is going to be doing here. Unfortunately, we scrapped the system by the time we got to the Iberians, so I had to go with the French instead. But yeah, I think something like this is probably going to be what it ends up being. Except the faction banners mixed in there. And you know, they could be actual banners and not the cardboard nonsense we're sadly enough stuck with. Yeah, consider this an answer to whoever was asking about that. We're stuck with these. Trust me, we've tried. Disregard everything else about how these units look, by the way. Obviously, these are old assets and old looking units from like 8 or 9 years ago at this point. I'm only using this to illustrate the concept of units coming from different regions. Nothing more. They're also going to be bringing back the Man of the Hour feature from Medieval 2. Basically, they're going to kind of use it as a narrative event to generate a new character in your realm. That's basically how they say it. And they even say how that could potentially lead to civil wars for the crown later. Good stuff. And we are still not done, because Leif made another comment in the same thread addressing some of the concerns and questions I was already about to ask. Most notably, he elaborates on what they're going to do with mercenaries. And yeah, basically it's a parallel source to get troops from, which is exactly what it should be. He also mentions the possibility of turning this into a mercenary retinue system with mercenary captains as proper characters. I think that's a very good idea as well. And if I can give an idea for something related to mercenaries, you should have a feature for distinguished mercenaries. Because the way it's worked in previous Total War games is mercenaries were basically just locals to the area. But that wasn't necessarily the case. That wasn't always the case. For example, the French hired mercenaries from Genoa. They didn't plop armies there to recruit them. They reached out to them and they came. The Almogavers of Iberia were also frequent mercenaries in the Balkans. I would love it if you could send envoys to Italy or Spain, maybe have it tied into the trade routes feature, have a set amount of turns go by, and if you succeed, a couple mercenary units join your roster. I don't know, I feel like that could be a useful thing to consider. Now, I have several questions about this. While a system like this will be great for medieval Europe, what about other regions? In that same comment about the mercenaries, Leif does give some elaboration a little bit with the Byzantines, saying how it's going to be like an opposite path for them, where they start out with a standing army and end up going with stuff that's more regional later. But there's still many other kinds of regions with different kinds of soldiers that are still not accounted for, notably slave soldiers like Mamluks and Gulams that have something different as well. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of a different system, but I'm curious to know what that is. Another question we have is how detailed is this region system gonna be? I think you guys said it's gonna be quite complex, so I'm very intrigued to see how that's gonna manifest with all the heraldry and stuff. Another question I have is, will you be able to recruit multiple types of units from the retinue? Will you only be able to recruit one kind of unit from that region? So like if you specialize in cavalry, will you only be able to recruit cavalry, or will there be like a small pool of units you could recruit from? I hope it's the latter, because I feel like that would be a little bit better. It would make the specialization a little bit too gamey otherwise, but that's just my opinion. I have one final question, and this is more related to the feudal system itself in this game more than the actual units. Can a lord or a duchy or an earldom rise in power and basically become a major faction in their own right and become like either a thorn in your side or basically take over the monarchy and become like a new ruling house? I feel like something like that would be very reflective of the time and also lead to a lot of interesting sandbox possibilities. The closest thing to that in our mod are the sleeper factions, which are factions that were, kind of like okay in the start, but don't come into their own until later. The poster child for this is Burgundy. Burgundy has some really cool and distinct late game units, but in the starting century, they're under vassalage of France. I'm curious to see if there's going to be anything like that in this game. So, yeah, that was a lot to talk about. This is why we need to keep track of this stuff, and this is why we're making videos, because there is a lot of important information that is falling under the radar, and I think it's important that we stay informed and involved. So that is basically it. We will see how things go with Medieval 3 at the end of February. Until then, I will see you guys later.